Test scores in U.S. history and civics hit an all-time low for American public school children. Weed addiction proliferates, according to new national data. And Democrats are initiating a Supreme Court ethics reform committee. This is the noteworthy news that you need to know for today, Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. But first, please be sure to hit the subscribe button down below for this channel. And also check out my show Timeless, which is on the Timeless playlist here on this YouTube channel. On to our first story of today. This morning, the U.S. Department of Education put out its first release of U.S. history and civic test scores among American public school children for the first time since the pandemic, and the results are dismal. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the nation's report card, that's sort of what it's colloquially known as, only 13% of 8th graders met the proficiency standards for U.S. history. That means that they are required to know certain themes, events, and people that those 8th graders were unable to explain. Less than 20% of U.S. 8th graders in American public schools scored a proficiency level in civics. This is pretty dismal, as I said. If you look at the test scores compared to 2019, in 2022, 8th graders scored 5 points lower on American history tests, again, compared with 2019. And U.S. history and civics are not the only areas where this drop in test scores has occurred. Back in October of last year, the federal government released test results in a variety of subjects, and we saw that there was the largest drop in math scores ever in U.S. history, in addition to a nationwide drop in reading, which reversed 30 years of gains in both of these subjects. Again, to look at specific test score data, compared to 2019, the average math scores among 8th graders dropped 8 points from 2019 to 2022, and reading test scores fell by 3 points from 2019 to 2022. There are several reasons, of course, why this could be occurring. The most obvious is the pandemic, because what happened between 2019 and 2022? Well, kids were sent home from school for over a year, so that clearly has something to do with it. I would like to offer some other speculations, namely that our curriculums have changed so much over the past 3 years. Of course, the big event of 2020 was the pandemic, which prevented kids from being in person at schools. But also that was the Black Lives Matter summer, which, again, whether you think these reforms were good things or bad things, we cannot deny that that summer kicked off a lot of reforms in our education system. I'm going to rattle off some changes that have occurred since then. The Oregon Department of Education, after the BLM summer in 2020, released this report in which they affirmed that finding one right answer in math is white supremacist. I'm not making this up. You can look it up. Oregon Department of Education, all of the state's Department of Educations have these websites, and they have codes in which they talk about their teaching philosophies, and all of them have radically changed over the past 3 years. So the Oregon Department of Education has affirmed this new idea that finding one right answer in math is white supremacist, and that they are going to encourage students and teachers to, quote, uproot white supremacy in math programs. Not sure how you do that in math, but nevertheless, this Oregon Department of Education document was affirmed among the largest convention of math teachers that happened a year ago. It was a gathering of over 38,000 math teachers in public schools across the United States, and they held seminars about how to undo racism in mathematics. Another example of how our education system has been uprooted, of course, pertains to gender theory. According to the Arizona Department of Education's website, they link chat rooms in which adolescents starting at age 10 can log online and talk about sex, gender, transgenderism, non-binaryism, etc. with fellow students and adults. This chat room actually has an escape feature so that a 10-year-old who is chatting on this chat room, if a parent walks in, they can click a button and immediately that chat room will be closed out so that their parents do not see this. Again, that example is from the Arizona Department of Education. Additionally, The New Jersey Department of Education released a report detailing the ways that they are changing the way that they teach gender to their young students. And the Department of Education even said that they would punish certain teachers in certain school districts in the state that do not abide by standards. And the final example I'll give, though there are many across the country, is right here in Los Angeles. The LAUSD, or LA Unified School District, has about 450 schools under its jurisdiction, and it has changed its curriculum so that every single month in all of the LAUSD schools, there are these Rainbow Club meetings where students, starting in kindergarten, so at age 4, learn about different theories and different I guess they would call them truths, I call them theories, about gender, transgenderism, non-binaryism, etc. So what we're seeing here is that we are seeing a replacement of hard subjects, or core subjects, if you will, like math, reading, hard skills. We're seeing a replacement of that with these new sort of woke diktats that the left has forced these schools to adopt. So no wonder we are seeing a drop in math, reading, science, civics, and US history, because it is being replaced with all of these different things. And relatedly, the Wall Street Journal reporting on this had a very interesting line in the article. It said, teachers have said that controversies over the content of lessons have dampened morale among students. Of course, that is very obvious. We have seen over the past few years an unprecedented assault on the character of our country. It has now become a mainstream opinion among those in the political left that the United States is a systemically racist, rotten place. There is no doubt that in our history we have made some grievous mistakes, and that students should be taught about those mistakes. That being said, there has been, again, this assault on the fundamental character of our country, and any expression of the goodness of our country is seen as sort of a betrayal, or seen as a negation of the mistakes that we have made. And so students, understandably, probably don't want to learn about US history and civics, and probably don't see a reason to want to learn it. In the classroom, I know this, having just graduated from college, I was a student not too long ago. The so what question needs to be answered in order for you as a student to want to learn the material. And I just can't imagine sitting in a classroom as a young adolescent, elementary or middle school student, and thinking that the country that I was learning about was this awful place and there was no point in me learning about it. Again, there is no wonder that these scores have dropped. Now, in a very sad but related story, alongside this new data that has come out about the test scores drop, there's also been data pertaining to weed use among young people that has been released this week by our National Institute on Drug Abuse. This shows that weed use, and specifically weed addiction, has proliferated among the young. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, 23% of those aged 19 to 30 were using weed in 1990. That number went up to 31% in 2012, and it went up even more to 43% in 2021. Whenever these national institutes release numbers, they're usually a few years behind because they're still collecting and refining their data from 2022, and obviously 2023 we are in the middle of, so they don't have data yet on that, so that's why it's only gone up to 2021. But isn't that amazing? 23% in 1990 to 43% in 2021. According to the National Institute of Health, the potency of cannabis samples seized by state and federal law enforcement has also proliferated. This is one of the biggest contributors to the now unfortunately common, but previously never before seen phenomena of marijuana-induced psychosis, extreme demonstrations of hallucination and paranoia. So if you look at this potency of cannabis products, from 1995, or in 1995, excuse me, the potency of the average cannabis product seized by state and federal law enforcement was 3.96%. Guess what it was in 2021? 15.34%. That is a 400% increase over the past 25 years. I'll give you some other data according to the CDC. In the 1960s, the average THC concentration in marijuana, by the way, THC is the active ingredient in marijuana, was 2%. The weed that our parents or even grandparents were smoking is very different from the weed now. In 1960, the average THC concentration was 2%. That rose to 5% in the 1990s. Now, in dispensaries, the THC concentration in joints is between 20 and 30%. Edibles are between 40 and 80%, and vape pens, otherwise known as dabs, can go up to 90%. It really is just astonishing. Suicide rates have also proliferated over this period that marijuana use has increased, and indeed the concentration of THC in marijuana products has increased. Suicide rates remained around 7 per 100,000 people between ages 10 and 24 from 2000 to 2007, but that has climbed by 57%. According to CDC data. I'll give you a final statistic, and there are many institutes of psychiatry and journals on psychology that affirm these findings. In 2019, the Lancet Psychiatry Journal published a study in which they showed that smoking high-potency marijuana every day increases the chance of developing psychosis by nearly 5 times compared to never users. In college, I took this fascinating class about libertarian economics. I'm actually still quite close with the professor, and one of the things that he argued, and it is a very mainstream position of libertarians, and increasingly is becoming a mainstream position here in the United States, is that drugs should be legalized because then, A, it will make drugs safer because they won't have to be sold underground or over the black market, and B, it will sort of make people want them less. The libertarian argument goes that part of the reason why people use drugs is sort of because it's bad and daring and they're off limits and it's illegal, and legalizing it may take away some of that excitement. I believe that the data that I just read to you really sort of discounts that libertarian argument. We see that there is a direct correlation here. The more that weed has become legalized, the more available it has become, more weed has proliferated, more weed use has proliferated, and more abuse of weed has proliferated as well. According to the CDC, 3 in 10 marijuana users suffer from marijuana use disorder, which is really a fancy way of saying addiction. 21 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized weed over the period that I was just talking about from the 1990s to now, and we see how much weed abuse, again, has increased during that time. Now on to our final news story of today. Senate Democrats are holding a hearing on Supreme Court ethics this week. Senator Dick Durbin actually invited the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, to testify before the Senate, and Chief Justice Roberts refused, saying that it would be an overstep of his power and sort of stepping out of line, given that he is a Supreme Court justice and should not really be involved in the matters pertaining to legislation. All of this really started a few weeks ago because ProPublica, which is a left-wing website, published a report on Justice Clarence Thomas's dealings with one of his friends named Harlan Crow. Mr. Crow is a billionaire right-wing real estate developer, and the justice and Mr. Crow have been friends for decades, and this report showed that Justice Thomas and his wife went on Mr. Crow's private plane, also went to several of his vacation homes and estates, and ProPublica argued that this was a breach of Supreme Court ethics because Justice Thomas did not disclose these examples of personal hospitality. However, what we know is that during the time that Justice Thomas was on the private plane or on the yacht or at the vacation homes of Mr. Crow, the existing Supreme Court ethics procedures did not require him to disclose this relationship with Mr. Crow. In fact, Justice Thomas asked his superiors at the court if he had to disclose such relations, and they told him no. Since then, as recently as a few months ago, the Supreme Court ethics rules pertaining to relations with particularly wealthy people have changed. But again, at the time of those relations discussions between the justice and Mr. Crow, it was not required for him to disclose it. But nevertheless, this kicked off a firestorm, and now the Senate Democrats are launching this committee on Supreme Court ethics. It does seem to be a bit of a head scratcher that they have ignored that in 2020, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, according to Fix the Court, did not disclose many reimbursements for trips to universities that she had taken. Also, in 2019, former Justice Stephen Breyer did not disclose that he was reimbursed for trips some 219 times from 2004 to 2018 by the wealthy Pritzker family. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. Penny Pritzker is a senior fellow of the Harvard Corporation. Also, the Pritzker family is a very wealthy, prominent family that donates hundreds of millions of dollars to centers or hospitals such as Duke University's hospital for so-called gender-affirming care research. By the way, I don't think those justices did anything wrong. According to the rules at the time, they also were not violating any ethics procedures, and they quickly, once they realized their oversights, changed their records in order to account for those reimbursements. But the point is that there has been selective focus and selective prosecution, if you will, where the supposed oversights of Justice Thomas, which again were not really at all oversights, he did nothing wrong, were more amplified by the Senate Democrats than those other liberal justices. It does appear that they do not like the fact that the Supreme Court has a conservative majority. 5 justices on the court of the 9 are conservative, and many Democrats have taken umbrage to the fact that the Supreme Court has made some conservative decisions, such as overturning Roe v. Wade, returning abortion back to the states, and also extending and protecting certain Bill of Rights freedoms, such as religious freedom, of course, ruling in favor of that football coach who was fired from the high school in which he worked for praying on a field. Again, Chief Justice Roberts denied testifying before the Senate, and actually, in a really sort of remarkable move of unity, the 9 justices of the court signed a sheet in which they all agreed on certain ethics and even said that they do not think that this investigation is warranted. But nevertheless, Senate Democrats are floating proposals to impose a new ethical code on the justices. The final thing I'll say before we wrap up is that the fact that the Senate right now is focusing on Supreme Court ethics seems to be a bit of a misplacement of where our energies should go. In addition, we know recently that the Department of Justice is spending millions of dollars and a lot of time and resources on suing the state of Tennessee because Tennessee passed a statute which banned transgender surgeries for minors. In addition, President Biden, in another example of energy being misplaced, has recently flew to Ireland in order to meet with Irish and Northern Irish leaders. Meanwhile, we have a huge problem with the war in Ukraine and China asserting its dominance everywhere. Given all of these issues, fentanyl, border crossing, 5 million undocumented immigrants have crossed into the United States since President Biden took office. The collapse of 2 banks, the First Republic Bank and the Silicon Valley Bank, in just 1 month. These were the second and third largest bank collapses in U.S. history. Americans are defaulting on their car payments at the highest rate since 2009. Really? The Senate is launching an investigation into Supreme Court ethics. Our president is flying to Ireland. The Department of Justice is suing Tennessee. Doesn't it seem more probable that we should be focusing on these other very significant issues than, again, these over-politicized ones? Thank you for joining me today. Be sure, again, to check out more news on this show, Julie Noted, and also check out the Timeless playlist right here on this channel for non-political, timeless, eternal subjects. Take care. See you soon.